Don't know if we're going to cover both chapters today, but we will kick the thing off. I will say that chapter 19, which is an exciting chapter, it's the return of Jesus, could actually follow chapter 16, but then we have 17 and 18 in the middle, and those are parentheses. So why do I say it could follow chapter 16? Chapter 16 says it's done, it's ready to go. In fact, I think I used the word last week that there's a crescendo building. The troops of the Antichrist are being gathered at Armageddon, and God is ready to take action. So 17 and 18 are parentheses, and as I mentioned earlier, well, the slide mentioned it, we're going to talk about the whore of Babylon, or the prostitute of Babylon, or the harlot of Babylon, depending on which translation you're using. Someone asked me the timeline between the rapture and the great white throne. You see the great white throne up on your top right? The rapture is just to the left of your screen. I will say that different people have different ideas on these timings. I'm going to give you my timing. I'll give you what I think is the craziest timing. Some people are suggesting that a lot of this stuff happened at 70 AD, which makes no sense to me. But at any rate, you have a rapture. The dead in Christ will be raised first, and then we which remain will be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of the eye. And at that point, the Antichrist will be revealed, and 7 seals of judgment will have been opened, and the 7th seal blows 7 trumpets. I've circled 7 seals. They're over off to the left here. 7 trumpets. The 7th trumpet blown introduces 7 seals. Now, the 7th seal, which is where we are right now, instead of introducing another set of 7s, it's saying it's done. It's time for Judgment Day. And so you have the rapture. You have the first 3.5 years, followed by a second 3.5 years, which continues us all the way over to here. This is not to scale in terms of time. 7 years of tribulation. Jesus Christ is coming back, and he is going to set up his millennial reign here on earth. At that same time, the serpent is going to be bound into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. At the end of those 1,000 years, Satan will be loosed. He will have a siege on Jerusalem. Fire will come down from heaven and consume the earth. The great white throne will be set up, and all of the lost, including the serpent, will be tossed into the lake of fire, where there's torment day and night forever and ever. So in the notion of a pre-trib, premillennial thinking, the rapture, 7 years, plus another 1,000 is 1,007, then the great white throne, and then no more time. We are in eternity, which means outside of time. So back to what we've been covering. In many of your readings, you've heard about the one world government, the one world church, the one world economy. The one world government was introduced in chapters 12 and 13. It's going to be revisited where we are right now. But introduced today will be the one world church and the one world economy. The first 5 verses of chapter 17, they'll all be the heading, but certain sections will be in red as we parse these verses to expand on what's happening here. So I'm going to read the verse once, and then we're going to look at the red on future slides. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters." So why Babylon? Why are they being judged? And the answer is because they corrupted the earth, they prostituted the religion, and they've killed God's people. Who is Babylon? The great harlot is associated with Babylon, and you're going to see where Babylon is referred to as a city. In fact, it's going to be called the great city. And then you're going to see another verse that says the harlot is the city. So there's a lot of symbolism that's going on here. And finally, where is Babylon? And both Isaiah and Jeremiah have devoted lots of press to those things. I'm not going to answer that question for you, but I will give you some things to think about. The great prostitute. She's great in the sense of being domineering, not great in the sense of being positive, wonderful. Okay. I mentioned to you last week there are certain words that can go either way. My favorite one is the word anxious. My grandkids are anxious for Christmas. On the other hand, I'm anxious about the upcoming dentist appointment. She is great in a negative sense. She has domination over the spiritual world across the entire world. She's the mother of prostitutes. And I'm going to jump ahead and look at just verse 5. And on her forehead was written the name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abomination. And so the question is, when has this prostitute got started? Now, I saw this picture on the internet, I don't know how long ago, and it could be saying one of two things. First of all, I will tell you, for those that are uninformed, that's a Mennonite girl. And the Mennonites, just like Baptists, are all over the board in terms of conservative to liberal. The more conservative Mennonites wear very plain clothes. The ladies wear, they call that a prayer covering. And they are the sweetest, sweetest Christians. If I said, describe for me what a sweet Christian looks like, I would say there was one right there. Now, this could be, and I think that was the gist of the article I was reading. Here's this sweet supposed Christian who is wrestling with lesbianism. Okay, that's one way to look at that picture. Another way to look at that picture is today you have a polarization of our society where one piece of religion is very pious and very Christ-oriented, and another piece of religion is saying that things like homosexuality and transgenderism are just fine. That's where we are today. So she's the mother of every false religion. And the question becomes, when did all this start? And the answer is way back when. You see here, Genesis chapter 10. Cush fathered Nimrod, and the word Nimrod means rebellion, who was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Well, you know, Esau was a hunter too, but Nimrod was a hunter of souls. You see, therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Notice it was the beginning of his kingdom. You read chapter 11, which talks about the building of the Tower of Babylon, and you say that's the end of it, but it's not the end of it. That's the beginning of his confusion. Then we come to chapter 11. Come, let us go down and therefore confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. We're familiar with those things, but look down at the bottom that's in red. And from there, the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Now, this is after Noah's flood. That's chapter that ends up in chapter 9. This is after chapter 10, where if you want to find that, just do a concordance search on the name Peleg, P-E-L-E-G, and you will see that when Peleg was around, that's when the earth was divided. And so now we have continents. And the question becomes, how did the people get to the Western Hemisphere? Well, they must have sailed on boats, because we see right here, the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So we start with Nimrod, and the question now becomes, where did Nimrod go? And there's a thread of methodology that we have to take a look at. And so Nimrod marries Semiramis. Semiramis gives birth to a son named Tammuz, the sun god. And if you see the sun god here and you see these halos, that's where the notion of a halo came from, the sun god. And Tammuz is supposedly gored by a wild boar. He dies, and he's resurrected from the dead. Sounds very similar to Mary and Jesus. And so you see here in the bottom right, there's your Mary, there's your Jesus, and we just read about the Nimrod mythology being spread all over the world. You see here India, Egypt. This is the original Babylon, over in the far Orient, okay? And I will say this before we go any deeper. Rome and Catholicism do not have a monopoly on this stuff. Whenever I'm searching for graphics to share on these presentations, I'm always looking for a picture that does not include a halo because of the origins of halo. Now, we've gone through this series several years ago at Oracle, and there were several Roman Catholics that were part of that study. I don't know if anybody on the phone right now is Roman Catholic. I will say that when we come to this point of one world religion, everybody's taking part. True believers, pre-rapture, they're gone. We read in a few chapters ago that when the two witnesses were at Jerusalem, that Jerusalem had become as immoral as Sodom and Gomorrah. But now when you think of the media, if somebody said in the traditional media, show me a photograph of Christianity, it would probably show you a picture that has something to do with the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is right now in the process of electing a new pope. The official title of the pope is Vicar of Christ, or Substitute for Christ. And if you pay any attention to some of the pomp and circumstance that those cardinals are go through, you will see all of the colors that we're about to take a look at. If you looked at a Catholic Mass, you will see in the form of the chalice some of the metals that we're about to talk about. And we're going to talk about the blood of the saints. And again, if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, you will see the Catholic Church guilty of a lot of bloodshed. Once again, the Catholic Church does not have a monopoly on this stuff. I have been worshiping in the Anabaptist tradition. Anabaptist meaning baptized again, has its roots in Europe, where the reformists were still staying very, very close to the Catholic Church. In fact, some denominations in Protestantism continue the notion of believers' baptism, but Anabaptist means to be baptized again. And so people were baptized as babies. If you did any kind of a genealogical search and go back over to Europe, it's not birth certificates, it's baptism certificates. And there was such a squabble that Anabaptists were actually being martyred by the reformists. So again, you're going to see a lot of Catholicism here, but Catholicism historically does not have a monopoly. And looking futuristically, all the churches are part of this same sham. The cultures go beyond those that were shown. Ashtaroth and Baal, they are very deep into the history of Israel. Jeremiah refers to a queen of heaven, a similar title that is given now to Mary. In fact, most recently, there is a push right now to call Mary a co-redemptrix. You don't have to be saved through the blood of Jesus Christ. You can be saved by Mary as well. The Greeks have their Aphrodite and their Eros, and the Romans had Venus and Cupid. Seated on many waters. Later on, we have an explanation of this. And again, as we go through chapter 17 and 18, you're going to see lots of repeat things, repeat in these chapters. And so if we go through this thing verse by verse, we'll see some repeats. The waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. So there's the answer, seated on many thrones, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. Whenever you're reading the Old Testament, you will find that adultery and idolatry run hand in hand. In fact, the book of Hosea talks about Hosea being told to marry a harlot, Gomer, and the picture of Gomer, a prostitute, is a picture of her as an adulteress, but also a picture of Israel as idolatry. And so what we're going to see here is, I wanted to use the word marriage, but it's the wrong word. I'll use the word unity. You'll see here a unity of civil power with religious power, where the two together were involved. So what she says goes. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Again, looking at history, when you think of the Holy Roman Empire, it was the Pope that was running the show. And what we're going to see is that same kind of thing is going to be repeated here. The definition of prostitution is to take that which has a proper use and to turn it into an improper use. Now, when you think of religion in Scripture, more often than not, it is in a negative context. If you're watching the Chosen series and you see these Pharisees, they're like villains in black and white running around in every single scene. But James tells us this: religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. After this, everything else associated with religion in the Scripture is downhill. I'm pleased to report that I don't have a religious connection with Jesus. I have a relationship with Jesus. So you're seeing here a unity of church and state. The dwellers on earth, we're going beyond the power mongers, the leaders of the church, the leaders of several government, but now we're coming down to the people. The people too have become drunk. And as it went with the leaders, so went the people. Once again, you can see that in the history of Israel. The nations were split. The northern nations fell immediately into idolatry because that's where the leaders pulled them. The southern kingdom stayed faithful, so to speak, with Jehovah, but you'd find those Ashtaroth and Baal things and Molech again and again coming back. And you look at the leaders, and that's what caused the people to go that route. Not only kings, but an entire global populace was influenced by her. You take a look at some of the horrible regimes in our history. You take Nazism. In the beginning, everybody was for nationalism and Germany first and the superior race. And then when it got translated into kill off the Jews, kill off the Germans that have asthma, kill off the Germans that are crippled, kill off the Germans that are maybe not blonde and blue-eyed. The people got pulled into that voluntarily at first and then scared not to follow the Nazi regime. Although she's influenced the inhabitants throughout history, it is the earth dwellers of the time of the end which are her final drinking partners. Think about that. You've been delusioned. You've taken on the mark of the beast. You're now one of those folks hunting other people. Jesus foretold that the immediate family members will betray one another. So they're drinking partners. With the wine of those, they have become drunk. And you're going to look back at Revelation chapter 14, once again tying this prostitute with the serpent. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink." Jesus doesn't make anybody receive salvation. He says, "Whosoever will, come and drink of the water of life freely." He said, "Ask and you shall receive." But in this case, they're forcing the people to participate, forcing the people to receive the mark or die. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making all the earth drunk, and the nations drank of her wine. Therefore, the nations went mad. I think it was last week where I spelled out the irony where blasphemers with their tongues are being punished on their tongues. We talked about them being gnawing on their tongues with pain. And I also mentioned that the penalty for blasphemy was being stoned. And here those folks are being stoned with hailstones, 100 pounds the weight. And here you see another irony where the people are drunk. This is obviously figuratively, drunk with the blood of saints. They're being forced to drink blood because when we looked at those 7 vials, 7 bowls, the oceans became blood and the waters, the fresh waters became blood. Again, a step through history. Ancient Rome, during the Caesars, they killed Christians. Medieval Rome killed Christians. I already talked about Reformation killing Anabaptists. Nazism killed Jews as well as Christians. Communism, I've heard it said that Joe Stalin killed more Jews than Hitler did. Islam continues to kill Jews. And so people historically and then big time in the tribulation, the notion of killing Christians drunk with their blood. And India is persecuting Christians. Whether they're actually killing them, I'm not sure. The spirit of Babel will be around until Jesus comes back. Keep in mind that verse we saw all the way back in Genesis. It was the beginning of his kingdom, and we're now studying the end of his kingdom. Jumping on to verse 3, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. So John is being transported, chapter 4, he's being transported to different places. In chapter 4, it was the throne room of God. In chapter 13, it was on the beach where we saw the beast. In chapter 21, he will be on a great and high mountain. Whether that mountain is in heaven or on earth, we're not sure, but he's going to a mountain where he's going to see the new Jerusalem and the new creation. And he says in verse 3 also, I saw a woman. He saw a different woman in chapter 12. We mentioned to you that was an allegory of the redemption story personified in the nation of Israel. Here he sees a prostitute as the great city. And later he's going to see the bride. So he gets to see 3 women in the book of Revelation. But now he's viewing things from a wilderness. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. We're going to answer the question, or not going to answer the question. We're going to raise the question, is Babylon Italy or is Babylon in Iraq? Either way, hang on. Either way, the landscape, the climate of those 2 places is not a wilderness today. But by the end of that 7th bowl judgment, the whole world will be a wilderness. Sitting on a scarlet beast, related back again to chapter 12, which we covered. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. The woman seated on the beast suggests some degree of control with support by the beast. Think about a horse rider. A horse rider with the reins and the bit has control of that horse. However, if that horse decides to go crazy, picture a horse on a bucking bronco, if you will, it's only a matter of time before that rider is thrown off that horse. Again, expanding on verse 3, the 7 heads and the 10 horns that we see tie back again to chapter 13, the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So I want to answer the question, what beast is she sitting on? Where it gets interesting is that word beast is assigned at several times, sometimes to the dragon and sometimes to the Antichrist. And we see that here. Sometimes this dragon is referred to as a beast, and sometimes this Antichrist is referred to as a beast. So which one are we talking about when we say she's sitting on a beast? So let's parse this through. Chapter 19 talks about the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who's in the presence had done signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. King James says brimstone. So these 2 are taken out of consideration because when we go and take a look at that woman's seat, she is sitting on somebody who will be held up during the millennial reign. You see in chapter 20, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who's the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit and shut him and sealed it over him so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. And so back again to the notion of riding the beast and the beast turning the tables on her. There you see a picture of that harlot riding the beast. And down below you see the fairy tale of the gingerbread man. So what happens in the next chapter of the gingerbread man? You see it there. The gingerbread man, as the fox crosses the river, says, come higher and higher, until finally the fox is saying, I'm almost underwater, get on my head. And when the gingerbread man gets on his head, the fox flicks his head and he eats the gingerbread man. And we're going to see the same situation with the harlot. The civil government is going to turn tails on her, full of blasphemous names. There's a phrase we use, birds of a feather flock together. And again, tying back to Revelation chapter 13, there is that beast, same situation, blasphemous names. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Again, I point out the robes of a Catholic church with gold and jewels and pearls. And again, I point out the chalice of the Catholic church, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. The prostitution of the church is going to change everything around. When you think of the Lord's Supper, whether you are Roman Catholic or Protestant, there is the cup and the bread, and the cup is filled with either wine or grape juice. Which of those? That's a totally different subject. But they are a symbol of the blood of Jesus Christ. This is the ultimate abomination, where instead of that cup, a symbol of Christ's blood, that cup is a symbol of the martyred saints. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes. I said we're going to be doing some repeat things. And of earth's abomination. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman. I already identified her as one world religion. And of the beast, the one world government, starting in chapters 12 and 13. And the dwellers. It's a world of solidarity. You either have that mark of the beast or you're going to be a goner. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. So why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery. It calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. Just like the previous verses, we're going to go through phrase by phrase and parse this out. For those who have a focus on Rome, thinking that Babylon geographically is Rome, there you see the verse we just read. And there you see a map of Rome, 1st century, 7 hills that surround that city. For what it's worth, there is no other city in the world that is surrounded by 7 mountains. On the other hand, we've mentioned to you that the topology of the world is changing. And so much for that. Again, with those who have a focus on Rome, was Peter writing from Italy or Iraq when he says, she who is at Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends you greeting, and so does Mark, my son. Now, this is not Bible. This is church tradition that Peter ended up in Rome, and that's where Rome was crucified. And that's where Peter was crucified. So when he was writing 1 Peter, was he writing it from Italy or Iraq? There is no church tradition that says he ever got to Iraq. Begs another question down on the bottom. Or did Iraqis visit Rome at the time that he was writing this? There are lots of unanswered questions, and I will say to you, study your scriptures. So for those who have a focus on Iraq, there's a photograph of modern Babylon. What happened was Saddam Hussein decided he was going to try to rebuild Babylon, and he did I'll call it a cheap imitation of what was originally there. That's what it looks like today. So, Babylon in Iraq, is it to be rebuilt? This is what Isaiah had to say. And in our introductory slides, we saw where Isaiah and Jeremiah both spent chapters on this thing. We're not going to read all the chapters. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. So this leaves you with the question, what time frame was Isaiah writing about when he wrote this thing? Did he write it from his perspective, where he saw futuristically the Medes and the Persians coming in and killing Belshazzar? If you studied the thing, what they did was they rerouted the Euphrates River. They walked underneath the wall and they killed the people. Is it that time frame where Babylon was never going to be raised again? Or is it this time frame where Jesus is going to squash the nation, the city of Babylon, and it will not be rebuilt during the millennial reign? I leave you with those questions for yourselves. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there, but wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Now, again, the time frame, if you read Isaiah chapter 11, he talks about the wild animals becoming tame during the millennial reign. So that has me thinking that Babylon historically was squashed. It's never going to be rebuilt. Where is this Revelation Babylon? So, is it possible that Babylon will be carried from Italy to Iraq? This is a wild thought, bear with me. And I've always said, if it makes sense, common sense, stop, or it'll be nonsense. And so if this verse holds true, this has got to be symbolic. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, two women coming forward. The wind was in their wings, and they had wings like the wings of a stork. And they lifted up the basket between the earth and the heaven. And I said to the angel who talked with me, where are they taking the basket? And he said to me, to the land of Shinar. If you studied the word Shinar, that's the real estate around the city of Babylon. To the land of Iraq, to build a house for it. And when this is prepared, they will set the basket down there on its base. Wild thought, but is it possible that all of Rome gets scooped up and carried off and plopped over there in Iraq? I'm not going to answer that question. There again is that same quote we've been following. Is Babylon in New York City? Why New York City? Well, first of all, it's the home of the United Nations. And the United Nations, if you look up the phrase Ark of Hope, it's the United Nations quest to create a one world religion. You've seen those bumper stickers that say coexist, and the C is the crescent of Islam, and the X is the cross of Christ, and you go through all those different kinds of things. That comes out of this Ark of Hope. Google the phrase Catechism of the Universal Church Project. This is a push by the Catholic Church. The Episcopals and communists have all gotten together, and they're writing a statement of faith, a catechism that could be acceptable to all people. In other words, a one world church. Moving to verse 10. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. And so you see 5 kingdoms that have fallen. And these look just like Nebuchadnezzar's statue. The Babylon, the Medes and Persians, Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, including all the Caesars, and ultimately Rome falling apart. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is today's world order, and the other has not yet come, and it's not going to come until after the rapture. The other has not yet come, And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. He's going to be in place for 7 years, a little while in the context of the full 6,000 years of the world. And then then number 8. And as for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. If we studied this, once again, this statue of Nebuchadnezzar belongs to the 7. All of these things have come down into this ugly beast. And when we introduced this beast in chapters 12 and 13, we talked about the physical characteristics of these others, the leopard, meaning the speed of Alexander the Great, and the bear, the power of the Medes and the Persians, etc. So what happens at the end of the time of the Gentiles? Daniel tells us, as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. And the 10 horns, we're up to verse 12, and the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, have not yet received their kingdom, King James, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. So people have tried to reconcile those 10 kings and who are they and where are they? Some folks would say it's the revival of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's difficult to come up with 10 kingdoms within that Holy Roman Empire. As we move forward in time, some people were thinking, well, maybe it's the common market that make up, but there are not 10 members of the common market. That was replaced with the European Union, and at one point there were 9, and now I think they're up to like 27 nations part of the European Union. That's not it. 10 regions of the world. The Rockefellers and others have divided up the world into 10 economic regions. Are those the ones? Again, over time, trying to come up with the popular notion of the time is difficult to keep up with. Now, this is an interesting concept. My grandfather was born in 3 countries. Now, how did he pull that off? First of all, when he was born, the village that he was born in was called Austria-Hungary. After World War I, that same place was called Czechoslovakia, and now that place is called the Slovak Republic. So why do I bring up my grandfather? When you come back up here and trying to tie things to those 10 kings, things are changing all the time. If you look at a map of the world today, there are countries that when I studied geography as a kid, they weren't there. Names have been changed. Mozambique and Madagascar is the closest one I can come up with. And then the ones that I really can't keep pace with are the different republics that used to be the USSR. They all end with Stan. One other new nation. They have not yet received royal power. And so some folks are thinking about the tech oligarchs. We have Elon Musk and Google and Amazon and our friend Larry Ellison and others. Are those 10 that are going to make this up? Now, I want you to see that verse back up there and put it in the context. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. I'm not saying that Elon Musk is one of these, but I want you to see the parallel there. They're to receive authorities as kings. Elon Musk has got a lot of power right now, not just in terms of his economic empire, but also in terms of the Doge department. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. Let's stick on the notion of the oligarchs. These guys have a lot of power. And if in fact these are the power mongers, and they hand over the combined authority and assets and intellectual property that these guys own, and they hand all these things all over to this beast, think about the power that guy has. We live in an information age. And it's going to be just an unbelievable situation. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. Government will tolerate religion until it becomes inconvenient. The most recent example would be, of course, right after 9/11, you had all kinds of congressmen standing on the steps of the Capitol singing "God Bless America." And then you take fast forward from that year, which was 2001, fast forward to today, and you see such ungodly policies that have been put in place. Historically, you have Henry VIII, where religion was convenient for him until he wasn't allowed to marry another woman, and then he had to invent the Anglican Church. Communist Russia used the Russian Orthodox Church to gain power and then turn its back on the church. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Another parallel, Nebuchadnezzar in Jeremiah was referred to as God's servant. God's servant went in there and destroyed Jerusalem, took many, many people captive for 70 years. In the midst of those 70 years, God struck Nebuchadnezzar, 7 years of insanity, and ultimately Nebuchadnezzar was saved. But as diabolical as he was called God's servant. But as for right now, the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. That is the situation within the context of the tribulation period where things are as it stands right now. Chapter 18 is where you see the tables turned